Good morning, everyone, and we are back for lesson 4. We are going to continue talking about shading today. Last time we met, we talked about what shading was. We learned a little bit about our pencils and the different tools that we're using, and you became experts at how you can shade something that has an object that has defined edges and planes, so specific sides. We talked about when we're shading, we need two things. Do you remember what they are? The first one is we definitely need an object. And the second is we need a light source. And I know I've been using the sun, but there's lots of different light sources. It could be a candle, it could be a light bulb, it could be a flashlight. So there's lots of different things that your light source could be. I've just been using sun probably because I've been inside and it's been a little bit gray the last couple of days, and so I'm thinking about the sun and wishing it was maybe willing it out by doing this. So here I've got an example of our cube, and we've identified the light source. We remember that when we are shading, whatever is in direct, the face or the plane that is facing the light source is going to be the lightest. We can't see it on this image. And we know that the plane or face on the opposite side is going to be the darkest. This one we made a little bit lighter because it would have a little bit of the light rays shining on it and hitting it, but it wouldn't be as bright as the top of the image and the side. So this is fantastic, and we can use it for any kind of a shape that has a defined edge or a defined side. But what about our objects that don't? Because we know that there's lots of things that are rounded or curved. And so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how we can shade those. We call this type of shading solid because it's just a solid color that we're going to put in on the face. But when it comes to something like a circle, so let's draw one in. Remember how to do your air circles. So I've got it nice and light. And I'm going to keep it light because what happens when we're shading something like this is we're going to do something called gradual shading or gradiated shading. So once again, we still need a light source. So I'm going to put my light source right here. It'll be the sun. And the same rules apply. When I'm looking at my light source, I know that whatever is first to be hit by it, when I draw down the light ray, that's going to be the lightest. So I know this is the lightest area here. And again, as I follow it through, the opposite side is going to be the darkest. So when we come in to shade these, we need to start thinking back to our grayscale. So do you remember when we did our grayscale and we had our darkest, medium, lighter, light, and lightest? We want to really focus on this kind of an idea because this is the gradual shading that we're going to be using on this object. We're going to start, you can start either with your lightest or your darkest point and work our way. Actually, it's probably easier, to be honest, to start at the darkest point and work our way closer to the light. So one really great tip is a lot of people will just start, drawing stuff in, maybe some lines like this. I'll show you. This is okay, but it can actually really flatten out your image. And so when we are doing this lesson, I want you to think about following the curve of the object that you're shading. So I can see right here that this one curves sort of in this tilted C. And so I'm going to actually start shading following that curve. Excuse me. Now, one of the things I noticed, and I'm going to start light. So I'm starting at the lightest part of my grayscale because I know that I can always make things a little bit darker. I mean, I guess I can erase too since I'm using pencil, but that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you might want to be using something else. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, as I get closer to the darkest area, I'm going to start going lower or darker on my grayscale. You'll notice that your curve starts getting a little bit narrower. And one of the big mistakes I often find people do when they start out is they really want to color the entire sphere in, or the entire ball. And I would just encourage you not to do that. That actually can flatten things out and take away from some of your shading. So notice I'm not doing that. And as I'm getting closer to my light source, I'm getting lighter and lighter. And you can even erase this very top, because that's right where the hot spot of the light is going to be. And you can see that that gives us a really nice three-dimensional illusion by using shading. Now, last week we talked about different types of pencils. If you remember, I have HB and 6B at home. So this is where I said some artists will use different pencils in the same drawing. So right now, if I wanted to go in and start using my 6B, maybe some of you were able to scrounge around and find a B pencil in your house. That would be great. If you did, now's the time to grab it. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in. We know that 6B means that it's darker than an HB. And what I can do is I can go in and really add that little shot of dark in the most opposite part of my sphere. And that just kind of gives it an extra little punch of shading and helps it look even that much more three-dimensional. So I mentioned last week that sometimes, well, most times, artists are using multiple pencils when they're sketching. And this would be one of those areas, or one of those times that you would go and reach for one of your darker B pencils, and how you would use it. So this looks really great. You've done a good job. What we're going to do right now, when I reviewed and was thinking about our shading lesson from last week, I noticed that I'm always putting my light source up on the top right. And that's certainly not the only place that lighting is ever going to happen. And so what I thought we could do today is start playing around with moving our light source and trying to figure out what area we would shade while practicing our solid and gradual shading techniques. So let's go ahead, and since we're really practicing on the gradual, let's draw another sphere. I'm not drawing them super big, but I'm not making them tiny either. I want them to be large enough that I can work with them, but not so large that I'm shading the same thing for a really long time. I don't need to do that. This is just, again, we're working in our scrapbooks. We're just practicing, so we don't have to work super large. But again, if you're a person who tends to work ultra small when you're learning new concepts, I wouldn't encourage you to work too small. All right, so I've just been fooling around with this sphere a little bit. I want to turn the circle into a sphere. I'm going to do that by using our shading. Up until this point, we've put our light source over here, so let's choose a different area. Why don't we put it on the direct opposite side? How about that? So maybe my light source is down here. Maybe it's a candle. And something I wanted to mention to you as well, we don't always have to draw the light source. So if you went back and were putting your light sources into your pictures and then doing your shading, that's great for practice. But when when you're actually creating a sketch, we don't really put, a sun up in the top, or, maybe we just see the light from the candle or the light from the moon, that kind of a thing. If the candle happens to be in the picture, that's great. But if it's not, that doesn't matter. We wouldn't put it there. So we don't always have to show our light source, but we do always want to show the direction that the light source is coming from when we're trying to create the illusion of depth. So I'm just putting it in right now so you can see it visually. But as we progress and start working through our sketching and our different techniques, we won't always put the light source in. It's just for reference right now. So because I know where my light source is, remember I can just take a look at where would that ray of light hit my object first. So notice I started at my candle base, but then I've corrected myself because the base of a candle isn't really lit up. It's actually the flame. And so I'm going to move it towards this sphere, and I realize that right here is going to be the real hot spot. So that's the place where it's going to be the lightest. I know that if this is the lightest, the side that's directly opposite is the darkest. And again, you do not need to be drawing these rays in or these arrows. I'm doing it just so that you can understand why we're putting things where they are. But again, while you're practicing and doing these, practicing these techniques, if it helps you, go ahead and do it. So remember, we're going to start at our darkest side, but we're not going to start at our darkest gray. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to lay down my shading initially. And this is candlelight, so maybe it's a little bit softer. It's a little less light than if we were out in a bright summer sun. So maybe my shading is going to go in a little bit closer than this one. And that's where, as you start playing around and as you start looking at real objects, you can start making those kind of decisions and start customizing your sketches based on what you're actually drawing. So what we're doing right now is I'm just giving you the techniques, then you're going to go and implement these techniques into drawing things that you're actually interested in. And with lighting and shading, it's really easy. I'm sure a lot of you probably have something round at home, whether it's a ball or maybe a cat toy, or could even be an apple or an orange or something like that. I would encourage you just to, put it on a table, see where the light's hitting it, and start sketching that out. And it can really be a great activity for you. You can even change the light levels. So turn a light down, maybe move it towards a bright window, shine a flashlight on it, anything like that. And then you can start really seeing how the shading changes and practice drawing it so that it really is reflecting whatever the shading and the light source and your object is. So that looks pretty good. Because I have my 6B pencil, I'm just going to go in and start doing my darker with that, because I don't have to press as hard and I can get a nice dark black. I'm going to bring the black up a little bit more because this candle is not going to be giving off as much light. And so I don't need to have it quite as bright. And as you can see, as I do that, it's giving a new look, and it's also creating the illusion that this is actually a sphere as opposed to just a flat circle. Do you see how that is? Awesome, well done. So why don't you take a few moments, practice a couple of different shading with your spheres by putting light sources in different spots. So maybe, what would it be like if we had something here? Maybe this is my flashlight. And so I know that this is going to be the brightest. I'm going to start off nice and light. Maybe it's a heavy-duty flashlight, so it's giving off a pretty bright light. And I've practiced that. I started with my 6B, so maybe I just want to go in and get some more of those grayer tones in like this, those softer gray tones. Great, looks good. So you can play around with that. You can move your light source all over the place and just see what that would look like in your object. The same thing goes for your solid shading. If you want to practice, you can use the same light source and maybe just move your objects around depending on the objects and where they are. Oh, that was a little sloppy, but that's okay. It's our sketchbook. Then remember, the ray is going to hit in different spots. So once again, this ray is going to hit the face or the plane that I can't see very well. So that makes this side the darkest. And this would have a little bit of light, or sorry, a little bit of shading on it. Okay. So you could even do a fun activity would just be to do circles and cubes, spheres and cubes, all around one light source, and then fill in the shading to find out where it would go. That might be a good activity to do just to kind of practice a little bit. And I do want to show you one more thing with this lesson, and that is the idea that sometimes there's going to be an object that has both solid and gradual shading that we're going to have to use. And so for this example, we're going to use our cylinder. So remember, we know how to make a circle turn into a sphere now. We know how to turn it into a bowl, and we know how to turn it into a cylinder. So for the cylinder, it would work the same as the bowl. What we're going to do is draw our foreshortened circle. Remember how we do that? Draw our lines straight down. And remember the key here, just get rid of this flashlight. The key here is to make our two lines coming straight down from those initial two dots and to follow the curve of the bottom of the foreshortened circle in order to make this really look like it's three-dimensional and giving it some volume. So this is great. Here's our flame. If it's shooting and heading towards the cylinder, then we know this is going to be the lightest area of our object. Now, this part of the cylinder is rounded. It doesn't have one plane. Just because we can kind of draw it like this and it looks like it has corners, it actually doesn't. If you look at a can of soup or a pop can, something like that, you know that there's no actual sides to it. It's just a curved shape. And so we have to use our gradual shaping on this part of the cylinder. So once again, I would encourage you when you're doing this, a lot of people want to do it flat like this, and it can work for sure. I'll show you, and as we get closer, it gets lighter. As it gets farther away, it gets darker. But we can also use rounded, curved lines to help just visually lead the eye in that direction to make it, to trick our eye into thinking that it really is more curved than it actually is. So whether you want to do some curved lines or you want to do a couple of straight lines, it's totally up to you. But again, don't go in too dark initially. And then once we get it in the way we like, then we can go in and start darkening up using those tones in our grayscale that we learned about last week. And then if you have a darker pencil at home, oh, that's not my 8, that was my HB, not my 6B. So here's my 6B. I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna make the edges even darker just to continue adding that illusion. And add to the shading. Very good. So now you can see we've got this part of the cylinder nice and rounded. It feels like it's got additional depth and additional volume. Now we have to think about the top. So this is one of those objects where I was saying we need to think about both solid and gradual shading, because unlike the sides or the body of a cylinder, which has no actual planes or sharp edges, the top of our cylinder does. So right here is a round plane. And so what we're going to do is we know that that's going to be all shaded. And depending on how dark or how bright the light is or what direction it is, we're going to either color it all in dark or one of the different varying grays on the grayscale. Or if the light source was up top, it would be bright white, just like our cube over on this side. Think about your bowl. It's the exact same thing. So maybe I'm going to draw a bowl down here. You can do the same. I'm going to draw my foreshortened circle. And then just 2 lines down and round them. Here's my bowl. Looks good. if I think about this, the top of my bowl is going to be the lightest. The bottom part of my bowl is going to be the darkest. I know that this is a face or a plane, so I just leave it. And this is going to use gradual. And so I'm going to start out light, build up as I get closer to the light source. Now, if this happened to be an actual bowl that was hollow on the inside, remember how we did that the other day with the, I'm just going to switch to my HB pencil because this one is a little too soft. So remember how we do 2 dots and then we join them up? If this was the actual inside of a bowl, notice that this light source is going to come and it's actually hitting the inside of this wall. So this part is actually going to have some shading in it. While the top stays light because the sun is, or the candle light source, whatever your light source is hitting it right from the top. So you can see that when we're sketching and doing different objects, are going to use both gradual and solid types of shading. And you can hopefully see now from this little intro how valuable having an HB and some other types of B pencils can be just to help you develop your volume and depth in an object through shading. It just gives you a little extra. You can see right here, this was my HB. If I go in and throw my 6B over top, it just kind of punches it up even more and gives me a little extra punch. So I would really encourage you today to practice drawing these different types of foreshortened shapes. Maybe try kind of what we did in practice. You could have the sun, or you could have a light bulb or something like that, and draw your shapes around it and really be conscious of what direction the light would be hitting it, and thereby what direction the shading would be. And then what you can do is head back to lesson 2 where we did our spaceship, and it's full of all sorts of foreshortened circles, and it's got some areas that would need gradual and solid shading, and I would encourage you to maybe go in there and add some shading to it. You'll notice that it really does make that drawing seem even more three-dimensional by adding this new technique to it. And then if you're really feeling inspired, I would encourage you to go and look around your house, see if you can find some boxes or some circles, some cylinders, and just position them under different types of light sources or around different type of light sources. It could be an open window, it could be a flashlight like we were saying, and sketch them, see how it looks. Really focus on the shapes and the shading. Don't worry so much about drawing whatever is on the label or, different colors, that kind of thing, because today what we're really working on is just using our solid and gradual shading and really drawing and shading what we see dependent on the type of light that we're using and depending on where the light source is situated in regards to that object. So go have some fun, really see how you can make your objects three-dimensional, and we will continue with shading next time we meet. I'm going to teach you a couple of really cool different shading techniques that will give you not only the illusion of volume and depth, but can also create different illusions of texture on your objects. So meet me back here in a couple of days for lesson 5. Until then, stay creative, have fun, and thanks for joining me.